Well, looky here, we're live. Hello, everyone. I hope we have an audience out there. I'm not sure Stu Turley can't be here today due to some other obligations he's having to take care of. So I'm David Blackmon here with Dr. Tammy Nemeth of the Nemeth Report. Tammy, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How is everyone today?
Oh, I'm
Great.
just wonderful. It's a beautiful rainy day in Texas. We haven't had any rain in 2 months, so I'm really happy about it.
Yay.
Irina Slav in Bulgaria. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you, David.
And
No
your
rain
garden
today
is
for
growing.
us.
You're going to have a
Yeah, my garden is
wonderful,
growing nicely. Yeah.
awesome, a bumper tomato crop coming, is what I understand.
I have a second crop coming.
A second
We
crop. Okay.
harvested the first one. It was abundant, small but abundant. Now I'm doing some winter tomatoes for pickling.
One of the things, and I'm sorry, this is just an aside. We'll get into the topic here in a minute. But, my recent trip over to Europe, one of the things that we're always amazed by when we go to Europe is that tomatoes and cantaloupes and other vegetables taste like tomatoes, cantaloupes, and other vegetables tasted when we were children in the United States. But our big corporate food companies have basically bred all the real taste out of most of our fruits and vegetables here in the United States. And so it's always wonderful to go to countries that haven't quite gotten to that point yet. The cantaloupe was really amazing. Anyway, I'm a cantaloupe junkie, and it's hard to find good cantaloupe in Texas anymore. So here we are. We're going to today, boy, we got a special treat for everyone today. We're going to talk about energy and climate policies in the brave new world of Keir Starmer's Labour Party governing the UK. And I hope we don't get anyone in too much trouble today, especially Tammy. I hope you're safe in Canada today, Tammy. No, you're at home in the UK, aren't you? So
At
we'll
home in
have
the
to be very
UK. Yeah.
careful. Yeah, the
Tiptoe
thought
around,
police.
I guess.
Right, I guess so. But the Labor government came in very predictably, has gone on a real aggressive attempt to radically change policies. I think in the way the country's governed these days, is was I think a lot of people predicted they would, including us. And so things are changing in the UK. They were already bad enough. Energy was already more expensive under the Tories than it ever had been. And I guess, Tammy, it's getting even more expensive now under the Keir Starmer government. What am I wrong about that?
Well, I think it's coming. I think it's a bit early, but they're already, setting up GB Energy, Great British Energy, which is,
Yes.
this state company that's supposed to be investing in renewables meaning wind and solar,
Yeah.
and wanting to bypass how um, planning permission is done in the countryside in order to stick up windmills onshore. Because the big thing in the UK was always, we'll put up the windmills in Scotland or offshore, and that will be not in people's backyard, and people will be happy. But it's not enough, right? It's not enough.
It's never enough. Yeah.
And honestly, the kind of middle part of England is traditional conservative territory. So it's also a bit of a punishment, I think, from the Labour Party to want to put the windmills and solar panels across the beautiful British countryside. So what that will mean coming forward is unclear. I think they're supposed to have a big policy statement in the next month or two. So that'll be interesting to see. And then there's a few days ago, the UK government decided to nationalize the electricity system operator. Now, what's interesting is that the conservative government had a consultation to do the same thing over the past 3 years. And so actually, Labour is implementing what the conservative government before it had recommended. So to me, it's just another example of the uniparty. Like it really
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it was conservative or if it was labor, you were going to get the same thing anyway. I think labor's just going a little bit farther with respect to creating a state company in order to do a lot of this stuff. I think the conservatives would have paid lip service to saying, well, this is private, and but we're going to work in partnership with the private companies. Whereas the Labour government just like, no, we're going to make this government controlled, and you know, it remains to be seen what that will actually mean for ratepayers, for taxpayers, because in nationalizing this system, they paid, like I mentioned last week, 600 and some billion, or sorry, 600 and some million pounds of taxpayer money, which they're going to recoup from the ratepayers, which are the taxpayers. So we
Yeah.
get to pay twice. Oh, great.
Well, Irina from Bulgaria, what is your view on what's happening in jolly old England?
Well, as I said before we went live, we were supposed to catch up with you guys. The East was supposed to catch up with the West, have a better life. You know, we were all going to be wealthier, more democratic, less corrupt. What I've been seeing is the opposite. You are catching up with us. Energy is becoming more unreliable. Governments are becoming more openly corrupt, because governments have always been corrupt. It was
Yes.
just legitimized in one way or another by lobbying or something. But now they're just openly being corrupt. I mean, one of the stories I've put in for today's edition of Headlines is that investors are returning to UK renewables. Guess why? Because of this great British energy and all the money that the Starmer government is going to pour into wind and solar. But for the life of me, I do not understand. Okay, wind, there is wind over the British Isles, but solar, how does solar make any economic sense in England or Scotland or Wales?
Yeah, particularly Scotland.
Yeah.
It is utterly ridiculous. It is a non-returnable investment, and it will never become returnable. So I think what's going on in the UK right now is completely insane. And unlike Tammy, who is delicate, I'm not going to be delicate. People are going to pay through the nose for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and that, well, I mean, we're already seeing that. Obviously, it all seems so consistent to me with, you know, what we've talked about many times here over the last couple of years on this podcast. With every solution that is being pursued as a part of this transition, of necessity, requires governments, democratic governments, to transition into more authoritarian forms of government. And that certainly is happening in the UK. We see it happening in the United States and Canada, all over the Western world. And this, just over the weekend, Antonio Guterres, I'm sure you both saw it, in preparation for the General Assembly of the UN that's beginning today, gave a talk in which he used all this code language about our institutions not being modern enough. They're not dealing with the problems of the current world, and we have to completely dismantle our old institutions and build entirely new institutions in order to deal appropriately with the issues the world is facing now. And of course, all based in climate alarmism, and using this climate alarm narrative as a means to essentially do away with democratic institutions that the Western world has had in place for hundreds of years and replace them with authoritarian, even totalitarian institutions. And I just think when I look at what's happening in the UK, and I don't live there, and I'm not experiencing any of it firsthand, but it all just seems to be, as Tammy pointed out, this uniparty effort to transition a democratic government into a socialist authoritarian form of government. And the establishment of this national energy company is the prime manifestation of that now. I mean, they're just not even really trying to hide it anymore. And, they just feel so emboldened and certain of their consolidation of power that there's no real reason to pretend otherwise anymore.
Yeah, they're going straight for totalitarianism. I mean, your foreign secretary, Tammy, mean, not yours, the UK Foreign Secretary, I apologize, said that climate change would be at the heart of British foreign policy.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
people are saying he's stupid or something. I have no personal impressions of the gentleman, but putting
I know.
climate change at the center of your foreign policy is.
That it's a bigger threat than war with Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, our government in the U.S. has been saying the same thing.
Saying the same
over the
thing,
past
right?
3
So
years.
why are they still poking Russia? It's like they're eager to go to war to Russia.
Yeah.
What about all the emissions this would lead to? They're contradicting themselves.
Exactly. But then they can sue Russia for climate crime.
That may be
There's
part of
Because
the
they
plan.
started the war. They started it, and so therefore Russia would have to pay. They've already been floating that idea. It was a few months ago.
They seriously believe this is going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, why not? I mean, they can say all kinds of stuff. And
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 they
you
can
have
tell
the
people to believe them.
yeah.
and you have the World Court or whatever it's called that has some authority apparently to do that sort of thing. So I'm sure that's what the plan would be if they ever get a resolution to the war. I wonder, Boris Johnson, when he was still prime minister, the uniparty leader, quote, of the Tories,
Yeah.
announced before he was kind of forced out of power a plan for a rapid increase in nuclear generation in the UK. Has that all just been tossed aside? I haven't heard any news about that any time in the last year, I don't think.
That's a really great question. I think there's a lot that are still in the pipeline, because they had been talking about the Rolls-Royce SMR, and they were shortlisting different things and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I mean, the process here is so long for anything to happen. It's like in Canada and the United States, these things take forever. So I'm not sure. I mean, you would think that GB Energy would be talking about nuclear. And if you're going to be redoing the electricity system operator, you'd be talking about bringing reliable nuclear into the mix. But yeah, they haven't really. It's been really quiet. And the Labour Party, I think, over the past few days has had their annual meeting or whatever, and they weren't really talking about that at all. So I don't know. Maybe in the budget that's coming up in October, they'll say something. But we're just waiting for all these things to drop, right? So,
Right.
what's the actual net zero policy going to be? What is the electricity system operator going to be? What's the natural gas thing going to be? They've made lots of announcements, but it's unclear precisely how this is all going to work together. So,
And will there be enough money for everything? Because nuclear costs a pretty penny to build.
it does, right?
Pays off
So,
over the long term, but it is expensive to build. And they have all this money, I imagine, allocated for wind and solar.
right. So, I mean, the subsidies can only go so far when you don't have enough money. They keep saying there's a 20 billion hole in the UK finances or something like that, and which is a big crock. Everybody knows it's a crock, but they say it anyway. And what does that mean exactly for all these other things they want to do? They're throwing half a billion here, a couple billion there, and what does that mean in the end? So
Yeah.
they always
Well,
seem
we
to
just
find money for that stuff.
we had this announcement this morning. I'm sure you both saw it of these big banks, 14 major banks, including Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citibank, Bank of America, Barclays, BNP Paribas, and others, doing this joint announcement with John Podesta at the White House today. Oh boy, John Podesta. Speaking of climate authoritarians, that they're going to somehow dedicate increased capital allocation to promote rapid build out expansion of nuclear now, recognizing it's a zero emission source. And then we had the deal last Friday, maybe the biggest piece of irony I've ever seen in the nuclear space. Constellation Energy getting this 20-year supply deal with Microsoft to provide power generation by restarting 3 Mile Island.
Yeah.
Which the unit 2 of 3 Mile Island. Unit 1, I'm sorry, they're going to restart unit 1. Unit 2 was the one that had the incident 45 long years ago that has basically held the nuclear power expansion in the United States hostage for the last 45 years. But they're going to restart Unit 1, which was not impacted by that incident, and it had been voluntarily retired in 2019. And supposedly they're going to have that up and running by 2028. But then you have this announcement by the banks of increased capital allocation. So the question becomes, though, is anything going to change in the permitting space, which takes 15 to 20 years to obtain permits for a new nuclear power plant in the United States? It's just a crazy long time frame that in order to make any difference before 2050 is going to have to be sped up. And we've had a couple of legislative efforts over the past few years that have, had bipartisan opposition and killed them. So I doubt anything's different in Europe, anywhere in Europe. It's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
Probably.
I don't know. I think France is able to kind of expedite
Well,
stuff,
yes, France,
perhaps a little bit
Yeah.
quicker than other countries. Germany,
Yeah.
it depends. It depends on the will, and it's like, what's the trendy thing these days that will accelerate things? Because if you think about it, what are they restarting 3 Mile Island for? Is it to actually help people have access to reliable energy for your own household or anything like that? No,
No.
it's for the AI servers.
Right.
Yeah.
So robots can take over your jobs in your life.
Right. So I follow this blog from Saskatchewan called Small Dead Animals, and so they had a little screenshot. It's gophers,
Small dead animals. Okay, I got to follow that.
It's a really great blog, and they had a screen capture of a tweet from Christopher Laycock, and I just want to read it out because it's so funny. Please turn down your thermostat so we can power the data centers we're building to enslave you. And I thought, yeah, that's
bullseye.
bullseye.
Yeah. Boy,
So we
what a way
don't
to
want
look
you
at
to
it.
have reliable energy for your household use, but we need to have reliable energy, and we'll build it out specifically for the server farms and for the AI servers so that it can control what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we're at.
And it's worth noting that even the International Energy Agency has been talking about nuclear for a couple of years. The IEA has been pro-nuclear, although not so loudly as it talks about wind and solar. But it has said repeatedly that the energy transition would be impossible without nuclear. I mean, net zero.
Yeah.
That vision of net zero is impossible without nuclear. And nobody was paying any attention until the data center operators, as you said, Tammy, said they need reliable energy.
Well, so the other interesting element with the data centers and the AI data processing or whatever is that they're being permitted to build their own power generation.
Yes.
So if a state or a province wants to do its own electricity generation, it has to meet all these different climate targets. But there doesn't seem to be the same set of restrictions about meeting climate targets for the data centers, because they can build natural gas or they can build whatever they need in order to ensure they have stable and reliable electricity. I'd like to know how that factors into the different climate policies that governments are putting forward. Do these companies have to, how does that comply with their ESG and net zero targets?
Right.
Now, do the data centers say, well, we actually are net negative because the stuff that we're doing is helping people reduce their overall energy usage, and therefore we're actually emissions negative?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they could claim that theoretically. And of course, the data centers are allowed to do that because they're not building utility scale power generation. And the regulations that are in place currently in most areas, at least of the United States, only apply to utility scale generation.
Right.
So they haven't gotten around to, for example, I have a natural gas generator to back up my home. So they haven't gotten around to regulating those things yet. And essentially a power supply for an AI data center is the same sort of concept. It's an isolated use for a specific facility. And I think what you're going to see, of course, is the authoritarians are going to go about regulating those home generators and anything similar to that in the coming
Yeah.
years. They probably already do it in California. I haven't actually researched that, but in Texas they don't yet. So, I mean, but in the response to by the central planners, who are pushing all this stuff, is always to crack down even harder, right? Whenever anything like that pops up. And so you have this new burgeoning part of the economy that is going to be building a lot of site specific generation that they're going to see as a problem that needs to be cracked down on. And so they will. And this is only going to continue, isn't it, until the people in these countries force them to stop, right? And push these people out of power, because this is their mindset. They don't know anything else. The solution is always going to be more government, more sticks, and fewer carrots as we go through time.
Unless
And
there's a pushback,
yeah.
But it's kind of the bait and switch, though, and this is this article that Irina shared around this morning from the Wall Street Journal, and where they were talking about all the different
green nerds.
The green nerds in Holland, and how they're using dynamic pricing or real-time pricing and all this different kinds of thing in order to basically get their electricity for free, because the wind and solar need to dump their electricity when there's too much, when demand isn't so high, and they're trying to create all this behavior shift. But that's what they tried with the EVs. And if people, I wonder if they're realizing that this is a bait and switch. So they get you in.
Nope.
What they did with the EVs, like, oh, it's free charging. It's so great. You don't have to worry. We'll have all these chargers everywhere. It'll be for free or really low cost. And now there was an article that circulated on the weekend that actually the costs of an EV are at like way more than a typical internal combustion engine vehicle, because of the high price of recharging, when you plug it in. So now they want to do this with your electricity consumption. They want you to be following real time, pay for the real time on the I forget what's the pricing, wholesale pricing,
The wholesale
and
market.
the wholesale dynamic pricing, so it can vary any hour. So before, it used to be you'd want to have stability in your pricing, so you could budget. You knew exactly, this is how much I'm getting charged per kilowatt hour. I know this is what it's going to be per month or whatever. No. Now it's every friggin' minute. You got to know what you're getting charged. And when it's peak time, well, then you're paying like 10 times what you normally would have. So they suck people into this. You get these green nerds going on about how great this will be. And wouldn't it be awesome if America brought it in? And it's like, no, don't think this way. It's a trick. It's a bait and switch. Don't do
It is a trick, and they're so happy to partake in the trick. Remember in that story, one of the green nerds who has 2 electric vehicles. So clearly he's not exactly a middle class earner. And he was so happy that he actually earned about 30 euro by getting paid to charge his electric cars during peak output and trial demand. It's amazing. He was happy about it. So how much did you pay to charge those EVs when you weren't charging them at peak demand?
Yeah.
Right.
Peak output.
Peak output,
And
it emphasizes,
they adjust to output. They adjust their demand to output. I don't think I'll be able to survive this dynamic pricing, honestly.
Well, they were trying to do that dynamic pricing at fast food restaurants in America. So if you showed up at noon when everybody else is showing up, you paid twice as much as if you were, instead of showing up at 11 or at 2:30, you'd be paying twice as much at 12 o'clock, because that's when it's busy.
right.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Did it work or did they drop it?
Oh,
I don't
it
know.
failed. It failed.
People just stop going. It's too much money.
Yeah, people stopped going during the peak times, and so 11 o'clock became the peak time instead of 12, right? Which nobody could have seen coming, of course.
Yeah, that
Uh,
too.
So on EVs though, we had a great report. Actually, I think this was in the Wall Street Journal too, about the collapse of EV sales in August. 74% year over year drop in Germany, and 33% year over year drop in France in total units sold, electric vehicle units. And so, I mean, and the same thing's happening in the United States. Demand is flatlined. Demand growth is flatlined in the United States for EVs this year. And I do y'all think this is a permanent phenomenon, or is it just temporary due to the evolution happening in that EV market?
I think it's going to get worse.
You think it's going to get worse?
Yeah, and that's not me hoping it will get worse. I think it's going to get worse because I did not expect this sharp drop in European EV sales.
I didn't either. Yeah,
I expected it to be much more gradual, much slower. But if this drop is happening just now, so soon, I think it's going to get worse. But unlike me, Bloomberg Net, I have the story open. It says that oil faces a demand issue, biggest user segment to peak in 2027. And guess what the biggest user segment is? It's car transport. And it tells us, sorry for taking the discussion in a different direction, but they're telling us that EVs are already displacing nearly 1.8 million barrels of oil every day. And this is going to grow because this is now a temporary blip. And EV sales will pick up and start growing fast again to such an extent that by 2027, oil demand growth will be all but flatlining. And these people are being serious about this. So let's ignore this. It's 44% drop for Europe in EV sales. 44! That's a lot.
For the whole EU as a whole?
I think it's Europe, including the UK. I'm not sure, and Norway. I'm not sure. But okay, I have to check. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know what. Right, and I don't know what's happening in the UK, whether it's different or not in terms of EV sales.
Well, in the UK, they mandated that the dealerships had to sell a certain percentage of new EVs. It had to be of all their vehicles sold, a certain percentage had to be EVs, and they weren't meeting those targets. We had a story a few weeks ago where the dealers were like, we're putting people on a wait list. We're rationing vehicles because nobody wants them, but we have to meet these percent targets. And so, what happens then? Does the price of used vehicles go up and so on? And if people still are driving used vehicles, then you're still going to need petrol or diesel. If you're keeping your internal combustion engine and you're not buying an EV, then you're still going to need fuel. So for them to say that there's going to be this decrease and so on, and Canada also has a mandate where by a certain year they have to start selling certain percentages of EVs as new vehicles. But I think in the Canadian one, they've also included hybrids in that percentage. So if it's a hybrid or a certain kind of hybrid,
they often do that,
right? And so Germany's also pressing for hybrids rather than pure EVs as part of the whatever mandates, is my understanding. So if it's a hybrid, you're still going to need fuel.
Yes, but isn't the authoritarian response to that to start outlawing the building of new gas stations?
That's what I think,
so
or closing refineries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's coming soon to all these countries.
Wasn't it California that was not allowing new service stations to be built in some of the counties? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they're already doing it there.
Yeah, but
any bad idea on energy you can think of is already being done in California.
There is a pretty good network of petrol stations in Europe, and I imagine in the US already. I mean, that won't be tragic. but they're trying to build more charging stations, and they're failing in that as well.
Yes.
And by the way, I just checked the numbers. UK EV sales were up 10% on the year in August. That mandate probably has something to do with it, because you remove the choice from people.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you have no choice. So then
Yeah.
it looks like the numbers are different. I would like to know what if that's a percentage number or if that's the actual number. You know what I mean?
It says 10% up.
Of new car
Month
sales or
over month
EVs
or year over
overall?
year?
Latest car registration data. Sales of new electric cars grew by 10% last month, as battery electric cars made up 23.2% of UK car registrations in August.
Of new car registrations, because
car
you're not allowed to buy because you can't buy
Can't buy the gas
internal
cars.
combustion engine. So then the
Sounds
numbers
right.
look better.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We ready to go to our articles here?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Oh, that didn't work. Where are we? Here we go. Okay. Next slide. Here you go, Tammy. You're first.
Okay, so this article just came out, I think, yesterday in the Telegraph, and the title is "Lack of Net Zero Clarity Puts Future of British Manufacturing at Risk." And the article talks to a UK packaging giant, which does paper processing, cardboard and paper and so on. And in the article, the person was complaining about that they're not sure, are we going to still keep natural gas? Are they going to be penalized for using natural gas to produce their paper? How can they be competitive with their European and American counterparts that have significantly lower energy costs? And so one of the arguments was that in the UK, they're paying something like 30 pence per kilowatt hour, and in France, it's 16, and in Germany, it's 17 equivalent pence per kilowatt hour. And in the United States, it's a fraction of that. And he's
Right.
like, so how can we keep going if we have these massive electricity costs and energy costs? And so one activist group, which is the manufacturing group that was cited by this author, is blaming natural gas for the increase of energy costs of 230% since 2008. But if you go to Carbon Brief, and I really don't like them, but they have this really great interactive map of the UK, and it shows the change in the grid in the UK from 2008 to 2018. And I mean, in 2008, the UK produced 337 terawatt hours. In 2018, that dropped to 330. And over that period of time, coal fell off a cliff. So they
Yeah.
shut down coal. They built up a load of wind and solar. Solar went from 0 to 12 terawatt hours. Wind went from 7 to 57. So you have all of these subsidized electrical generation, which drove up the cost. And then they shut down the reliable, cheap coal. Then they built actually, the amount of natural gas power has dropped. So how can it be the fault of natural gas when the whole grid has been reoriented, all the new transmission lines, all this stuff, to wind and solar? So the argument that this is all the fault of the high cost of natural gas over the past 2 years is it's just garbage. So are we in for more of this? Probably. And the manufacturer was like, we need some consistency and clarity on where the grid is going, what we're allowed to use, and how much this is all going to cost, because can't compete.
Right.
Can't compete.
And otherwise, they're going to have to move overseas, right? They have to move the plant to China or wherever.
Right. Or if they're friend shoring or whatever, we'll go back into the EU or whatever, and it'll go over to France, because France will have cheaper electricity.
Yeah, and that's the negative impact of all these policies potentially to national economies is the loss of industry, the deindustrialization of the country, which really is at the heart of the goal of all this, frankly.
Right. And the most hilarious thing in this article is they were talking to the minister for, I don't know, net zero, not net zero, was something else, industry or whatever. Oh, we have to be really careful that this doesn't turn into deindustrialization. It's too late.
A little
It's
late for
too
that.
late.
They're
You're
just
not
calling
going to
it another name.
right. They'll put some other name to it. Who knows, right? I mean, just
Oh my gosh. It's like
gaslighting.
raising the alarm after the fire's already consumed half your home, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my story.
Irina.
Oh, you mentioned Podesta,
Yes,
David.
our
And I
our
was
hero.
surprised to hear that he actually had a good word to say about the growth in US oil and gas production and the fact that this growth continued under the Biden administration. Now, why might that be? He says it's an economic success, it's an energy security success. You're saying this? And then I remember there's an election in less than 2 months.
Oh, I know, that was so funny. I
Exactly.
couldn't believe that headline.
Yeah. And so pathetic
exactly
and so
it.
obvious, and apparently he didn't care about it being pathetic or obvious.
No, he's shameless.
Yeah,
No, he had polling data that showed it might be positive for the Harris campaign to say that.
imagine
why he said
that.
Yeah.
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 They needed polling data for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other story is, this is just ridiculously funny. And the other story that I mentioned, is it time to invest in the UK's green transition again?
Like they stopped?
Really? So there was an outflow of investments from the UK's green transition. So apparently, after the Simon government came into power and all these GB Energy and all these other ambitious plans are making investors optimistic about the UK's transition once again. Translation, to my mind, they're giving out money. Let's get in line for some, because that's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Left to market forces, the transition is uncertain at best. So apparently investors were getting more reluctant. But now that, Labour has this manifesto of doubling onshore wind, tripling solar, quadrupling offshore wind, and they're giving money for this. So obviously investors will be very interested in that, which is stupid. If I were an investor, I would have thought this is stupid, because you cannot secure long-term returns on subsidies. I thought this has become clear and evident. Apparently it hasn't. And they're still falling for this.
Not to the Financial Times. I can't help noticing the source of that story, the
Yeah.
Financial Times, which used to be a real newspaper that contained real news about business and the economy, and now is nothing but a reciter of the prevailing
It's
narrative.
the Guardian. It's become almost the same as the Guardian.
Yeah.
It still reports news and reports facts, but grudgingly. It never fails to give it a little bit of a spin to
Yeah.
make it sound better, in line with the narrative. It's really tragic. But yeah, investors are once again interested in investing in the UK's transition. Let's see how
glory
this
days.
goes.
Yes.
Yeah, subsidies, handouts, all that kind of great stuff. Apparently we have loads of money, even though we're in debt. Who knew?
Yeah. Well, what
Yeah,
happened to
well,
that $20 billion hole in the budget?
when you make people pay twice for the same thing, Tammy, you get
Yeah.
money until people
That's
run
right.
out of money.
Yep.
And then you print more money.
Your tireless efforts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, a $20 billion budget hole is nothing here in the U.S. We're going to pay $1.2 trillion in
Yeah,
interest
you
on
guys
our
work
national
with
debt.
Yeah, I
trillions.
know, that's crazy.
So that's child's play to us
Yeah,
here
how
in
many
America.
zeros is that? What's a trillion?
Oh, it's not funny at all.
So I've got a couple here. I'm going to do the second one first. The Pete Buttigieg defending the Biden-Harris EV charger boondoggle. Now, this is one I posted on LinkedIn. I got a copy of the video of our glorious transportation secretary who has zero qualifications for the job. He's a former mayor of a small town in Indiana, but he's, a few years ago, he was like the rising star in the Democratic Party. So they gave him this cabinet position thinking it's an easy gig, for 4 years. to raise his profile. And he appeared on CNBC and tried to explain why it is that the Biden administration has wasted $8 billion on a program that's supposed to be building out thousands, tens of thousands of new EV charging stations all over the country, and they've only managed to build 8 of them. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And amazingly, LinkedIn suspended me for simply publishing a video of a driver in, I think it was in Germany, getting out of his car and pulling Just Stop Oil protesters off the road so he could drive on down the road. And I posted that video on LinkedIn, and last Sunday they suspended me for 3 days until they determined, well, that doesn't really violate our community rules. I thought when I posted this video of Pete Buttigieg stammering around about wasting $8 billion on 8 charging stations, that they'd probably suspend me for that too. But no, they let that thing go viral and it was no problem. So I really don't understand what the censors are thinking at LinkedIn anymore. So I'll just keep on posting the videos that I find interesting. Anyway, there's no way to justify wasting $8 billion on 8 charging stations. And that's what poor Pete had to try to do. The other story.
Maybe it was for, it is an election year.
It is an election year. Yes, it is. And Kamala Harris, has to justify. Well, no, she really doesn't, because nobody asked Kamala Harris any questions.
Anything,
is totally in the tank for her. So she never gets a real question posed to her. So she doesn't have to explain any of this. But the guy on CNBC, who I'm going to forget the host's name, he's really good, though, really smart guy and a great host. And CNBC, actually, unlike the Financial Times, still focuses on economic and financial news, which is so it's what I watch most of the time during the day. Then the other story, Beirut blasts, Lebanon rocked by wave of handheld radio blasts as solar energy systems explode.
What?
This headline just cracked me up. So the Hezbollah terrorists are based in Lebanon, and their analog pagers all blew up and killed and maimed a bunch of them. And then the next day their walkie-talkies blew up and killed and maimed a bunch more, because the Mossad had intercepted the shipments of those walkie-talkies and pagers, devices, whatever you want to call them, that had been ordered by Hezbollah and planted explosives in them that they were able to detonate simultaneously. But then at the same time that was happening with the walkie-talkies on the second day, a bunch of home solar panels blew up that were on top of people's houses in Lebanon. And I haven't seen any follow-up stories yet to explain whether or not that was connected to the walkie-talkies, Yeah, and you got to kind of wonder now. Sometimes I'm almost afraid to turn my television on at my home. I don't think the Mossad has a grudge against me, but it's all a pretty stark lesson that you don't want to become a target of the Mossad. Which I thought everybody already knew. It doesn't have to
be Mossad. If one intelligence service can weaponize devices, then so can others.
Yes, exactly.
Really,
exactly.
But I haven't read this story, but I did remember reading a couple of years ago, I think it was a study of the most frequent problems with rooftop solar installations. And by far the biggest problem was bad work, bad installation work.
Yeah.
That could cause a fire. So, in Lebanon, they have a really big problem with energy supply. I think they still do.
They still do. Didn't Robert Bryce focus on that in his one of his documentaries?
I can't remember.
Yeah, where they had these little generators.
Oh, yeah. So if they were hastily assembled, hastily installed and improperly installed, that could be it. Yeah. I mean, I do hope Mossad wouldn't waste time to, put detonators in people's rooftop solar installations. That would be a step too far. But yeah, this is a problem. And with this shortage, remember there were complaints about the shortage of qualified technicians to put up rooftop solar. So probably there's a lot of shoddy work in rooftop solar
Yeah.
in Europe.
Yeah, there probably is. And, there probably is in the United States too. Although I think, rooftop solar does make sense if you can afford it. Right.
It does make sense. Yeah. We're putting up an installation right now.
Yeah. And so, it does make sense. We priced it out in the wake of the winter storm a few years ago for our home, and it was going to cost 4 times the cost of a natural gas generator. So we went with the generator instead. It was just crazy. The way it's marketed in the United States, home solar is basically this Ponzi scheme.
It does sound like it. How is it so expensive? Yeah. It's so subsidized.
So what happens is they advertise you get a 0% interest loan, right, to finance your home solar system. For our house, if we paid cash for home solar for our whole house and 2 big Tesla batteries in our garage for backup, it would have cost us about $40,000 in cash. Okay. But if you do the quote 0 interest loan over, which has a 25-year term, so it makes your payments pretty low. But when you calculate it out, the number of payments times the monthly payment you're paying, it came to about 4 times that $40,000. So about $160,000. So is that really a 0% interest loan? And the little kid, they send a kid out who doesn't know anything about it to go through a PowerPoint with you. And when I asked him the question, I said, well, if it's a 0% interest loan, I'd only be paying $40,000 over that span. So how can you say it's a 0% interest loan? And he said, well, the finance company just marks up the principal to that amount to calculate your payment. And I said, well, then it's not a 0% interest loan. That's about a 12% interest loan in reality. That's the reality of it.
Fall for this.
Yes. And people fall for it. And it's mostly people. Yeah. And mostly the people, and it's a 25-year loan. So it's effectively a second mortgage on your house.
Yeah.
And most of the people who fall for it are elderly people and people who really can't afford a second mortgage.
Yeah.
And so this whole scheme is going to fall apart in the United States the way it's being marketed. And they're going to have to ultimately, you're already getting a lot of pushback from people in California and Texas about it. And I think in the coming 5 years or so, it's all going to kind of fall apart. And they're going to have to come up with a different, more honest model to market those systems to homeowners. Otherwise, the politicians who have supported it all aren't going to win re-election. So
it's horrible.
So we're 50 minutes in. I think we've gone through our agenda. We have an amazingly quiet audience today, although there are plenty of people watching. No one wants to ask questions.
That's probably because Stu isn't here.
I guess so. Yes, Stu must be the question generator. Anyway, do you guys have anything else you want to raise for this episode of the Energy Realities podcast?
I think we covered everything, rants and all.
I think we have. Next week, we'll be talking about something else, and hopefully Stu will be back. We'll have our full retinue here.
Yeah.
And you can find Tammy at thenemothreport.com. Where else can people find you, Tammy?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm thinking about doing a Substack, so that'll be coming soon.
We need you on Substack. Absolutely.
Yeah, you come on Substack. Stu's getting a cat.
Yay!
All right. Good deal.
No, I don't know. He is, but he said he was.
He said he would. Okay. Irina, where can people find you?
On Substack, Irina Slav on Energy, and I'm on X, mostly reposting, quoting other people's posts.
Which is fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. Yeah.
It is. It is fun. Stu, you can find Stu on Substack as well. Energy News Beat at Substack. Yeah. And you can find me on Substack. We're all on Substack, or we're going to be when Tammy gets on.
Because it's a great place.
Yeah, exactly. I'm at Blackmon.substack, and I have a lot of fun there. Everything I do, you can find linked there. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe and hit the like button. That will really help us, our metrics. And for the rest of you, I'm sorry you didn't have any questions or comments. I guess we bored you to tears. Well, surely not.
We had fun doing it.
Yes, we had fun anyway. And that's all. Wait.
I have one thing. Is it the climate week? in New York this week or something?
It's UN
Is it-
General Assembly week. I don't know. Maybe it is Climate Week.
Okay.
Isn't
I don't
every
know.
week Climate Week?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But they're
Every day is
supposed to
Climate
be
Day.
climate's in front of everything, right? So every day is climate
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I can't wait to hear what fright language Mr. Gutierrez rolls out when he makes his opening remarks. I think that's today.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
Is that
UN
today?
General Assembly.
Okay. So we'll have
Exciting.
exciting
Yeah.
to talk about next week.
Absolutely. Maybe we should make that our topic. Anyway, folks, thank you for joining us. We're out of here about 10 minutes early, but that's okay too.
It
And
just wait.
appreciate you watching.
Bye.
And we'll be back in a week. Y'all have a great week.
Have a great one.
Have a great one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And we will end.